Okay, so buonasera, good evening. I'm honored to welcome you to the third year of the Poetry Place International Festival. My name is Noa Shakarji, and I'm part of the literary committee of the Poetry Place, along with Gilad Meiri, who is muted, but he's here. He's sitting with me in the room. This session is dedicated to the Italian poet Valerio Magrelli, and he will be hosted by Magrelli's Hebrew translator, Jonattan Fine. I will now introduce Jonattan, and he will introduce Valerio in a minute. So Jonattan Fine is a writer and translator of Italian literature. His first book released won the Harry Hershon Prize, the Minister of Culture Prize for Beginning Writers, the Goldberg Foundation Prize, and the Bustan Scholarship from the National Library. He translated from the works of Primo Levi, Natalia Ginsburg, Italo Sabo, and Umberto Eco, among others. Jonattan holds a master's degree in Italian literature from the Hebrew University. This session will be about an hour, and I invite you to write questions and comments in the chat box. We will dedicate the last 10 minutes or so to a short Q&A. And now I pass the microphone to Jonattan and wish you all a pleasant evening. Jonattan, please.
Hi, Erev Tov. Good evening, buonasera. When I told my colleagues and friends, basically from Italy, that I will be speaking with Valerio Magrelli, the common response was, oh, Magrelli. There was like this sense of honor and reverence. And then came, oh, che bello, and the general enthusiasm. But there was this sentiment of excitement, which I absolutely share. So we're honored to have you. Valerio Magrelli is a poet, a notable translator of French literature, including Paul Valéry's poetry and Roland Barthes and others. He's also a professor of literature and the author of several books, both poetry and otherwise. Valerio's poetry has earned various prizes in Italy, has been translated into several languages. The Guardian described it as owning a combination of meticulous clarity and a sense of mystery. And that's not a bad place for us to start, I think. So this is Valerio, and I think that without further ado, we can read some poems.
Okay.
So here we have here the presentation. I will start in Hebrew for sake of our local audience, or maybe it's better for Valerio to start in Italian. Sorry, I think it makes more sense. I think you should, yes. Okay. After all, you wrote it.
Hello and good evening. I'm very happy to be here and to speak about you. The first thing I have to say that my poetry is better than my English, so excuse me. This is a very, very old poem, 1980. Io abito il mio cervello come un tranquillo possidente le sue terre. Per tutto il giorno il mio lavoro è nel farle fruttare, il mio frutto nel farle lavorare e prima di dormire mi affaccio a guardarle con il pudore dell'uomo per la sua immagine. Il mio cervello abita in me come un tranquillo possidente le sue terre.
בעברית זה הולך ככה. אני פוקד את שכלי כבעל אחוזה נינוח את אדמותיו. כל היום עמלי הוא לדאוג שיתנו פרי. שכרי בעצם עמלן. ולפני השינה אני מתייצב לראותן ברתיעה המבוישת של אדם לנוכח פניו. שכלי פוקד אותי כבעל אחוזה נינוח את אדמותיו. So before we exchange a few words, let's hear right away the second poem as well, and then we have a more elaborate discussion to draw on.
Yes. Scivola la penna verso l'inguine della pagina e in silenzio si raccoglie la scrittura. Questo foglio ha i confini geometrici di uno stato africano in cui disegno i filari paralleli delle dune. Ormai sto disegnando mentre racconto ciò che raccontando si profila. È come se una nube arrivasse ad avere forma di nube.
מחליק העט על פני חמוקי הדף, והאותיות מצטרפות בדממה. לדף הזה גבולות גיאומטריים של מדינה אפריקנית, שבה אני מסרטט טורים מקבילים של דיונות. ובעודי מסרטט, אני מספר את אשר בסיפורו לובש מתאר. זה כאילו ענן יגיע לכדי צורה של ענן. Okay, so we have an initial idea of Valerio's poetry, and that I think gives us an opportunity to start discussing or having some thoughts about it. And what I found most striking in these poems is, as you said, that they were written at an extremely enviable young age. And usually it is, common imagery or idea that the young poets are emotional, enthusiastic, and so on. But these two poems are very cerebral, even abstract. So my first question would be, what does poetry enable you to express? Or how did you discover poetry as a meaningful way of expression? And perhaps I should ask how poetry has found you.
Well, when the book was published, I was 23. So I wrote my poems between 15 and 18 age old. So it's difficult to explain why. I didn't choose, in fact. I can say that the quality of my texts was very influenced by my lectures. I was studying philosophy, so I read a lot of philosophical books. And I don't know, this idea is from Italo Calvino, a close friend of Primo Levi. Well, Calvino was one of the first that said that the most important writer in the 17th century was perhaps Galileo Galilei, the scientist. So, in a way, I was really charmed from this kind of writing, Berkeley or Hume, the English philosophy, Locke, for instance. I spent years and years reading this kind of text. So my poetry was very similar to these models, and it was completely different from the poetry of these years in Italy. I just can say that Valentino Zaiken, a poet, a very close friend, was a model from me. But for the rest, I was in a very polemic way against the two emotional poetry that was published in this year, 1980. So in fact, I was formed by this lecture. This is a quotation from Borges. Jorge Luis Borges said, "I'm more proud from the book I've read that of the book I've written." And I think I participate of this family. for me, reading is important.
And it shows because the topic of the two poems is always in the vicinity of the reading and writing experience. So usually, again, as I said, the debut poet is something, you know, with the heart or and so on. But then again, you've started your journey from a very conceptual mode. Would you say that that's the central? Why has that fascinated you enough to start the journey within poetry? That's what
Jonathan,
I'm trying to do.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you please come closer to the microphone?
Yes, is it better?
Okay, for me, I mean, yeah. I have a couple of poets that represent very good this this problem. I mean, the first one is René Char, very Orphic, very dark, very complicated. And the second one is Francis Ponge. They are both friends. French, because I teach French literature, because I like, of course, French literature. Well, Francis Ponge, on the contrary, is very clear. He tried to understand the chaos. Char continue the language of the chaos. Ponge tried to translate the chaos in something more clearer. I can say that at least at the beginning of my story, I like this way. I have to say that it was perhaps a way to control something very unordered, very chaotic. For me, to try to reach an order is an answer to something very dangerous and dark. And in the second part of my life, I had the change. I didn't plan it. I didn't program it, but in fact, the first book is quite different from the second. They are in total seven books in 42 years. Okay, more or less.
So yeah, so poetry, beyond anything else, is also means to deal with the internal chaos. Great,
Yeah.
It's a very good insight to begin with, and also we shouldn't be misled to believe the tone, the tranquil tone, because as you say, it covers something else. So with that in mind, I think it's a good occasion to go to the next couple of poems, if only because they represent something a bit different, a different kind of coming to terms with the chaos, both you know, on the romantic side, and even more so on the material side of the world itself.
Yeah.
So I will let you begin again. We'll read two of them, and then we can proceed.
Yeah, chaos, and I can add eros too.
Okay,
just
chaos and eros.
Yeah, just 2 words about the end of the poem, in which every Italian reader could recognize a quotation from Dante. I tell you because for us, Dante is like the oxygen. It's like something, it's like the air. So, l'abbraccio. Tu dormi accanto a me, così io mi inchino e accostato al tuo viso prendo sonno come fa lo stoppino da uno stoppino che gli passa il fuoco, e i 2 lumini stanno mentre la fiamma passa e il sonno fila. Ma mentre fila vibra la caldaia nelle cantine, laggiù si brucia una natura fossile, là in fondo arde la preistoria, morte, torbe, sommerse, fermentate, avvampano nel mio termosifone. In una buia aureola di petrolio, la cameretta è un nido riscaldato da depositi organici, da roghi, da liquami. E noi stoppini siamo le due lingue di quell'unica torcia paleozoica.
חיבוק. את ישנה לצידי, ואני נרקן אלייך. וסמוך על פנייך נרדם, כמו שפתיל קרב אל פתיל המעביר לו אש. שני נרות דולקים, שעה שהלהבה עוברת והשינה פושטת. אבל כשהיא פושטת, עוד רוכש הדוד בחלל המרתף. שם נשרף טבע מאובן, אי שם במעמקים לוהטת פרה-היסטוריה. כבול, מת, ששקע באדמה ותסס, בוער עכשיו ברדיאטור. בתוך הילת נפט חשוכה, חדר השינה הקטן הוא כן מחומם, במשקעים אורגניים, בשרפות, בשפכים, ואנחנו, הפתילים, שתי לשונות אש של אותו לפיד פלאוזואיקוני. We have another poem lined up, so
I can see just the beginning, not the full
yes,
poem.
the second part is coming. It's too long a poem for a single slide, so we're fine.
Oh, yeah, okay. You'll see that this poem is shaped in a strange way because there are 4 or 5 stanzas and a little line, a unique verse at the end. Che la materia provochi il contagio se toccata nelle sue fibre ultime, recisa come il vitello dalla madre, come il maiale dal proprio cuore, stridendo nel vedere le sue membra strappate. Che tale schianto generi la stessa energia che divampa quando la società si lacera, sacro velo del tempio, e la testa del re cade spiccata dal corpo dello Stato affinché il taumaturgo diventi la ferita. Che l'abbraccio del focolare sia radiazione, rogo della natura che si disgrega, inerme davanti al sorriso degli astanti, per offrire un lievissimo aumento della temperatura ambientale. Che la forma di ogni produzione implichi effrazione, scissione, un addio, e la storia sia l'atto del comburere e la terra una tenera catasta di legname messa a asciugare al sole. È incredibile, no?
שהחומר יכול לגרום להידבקות אם ניגע בקצות הסיבים. נתלש כעגל מאימו, כמו חזיר מליבו שלו, צורח למראה איבריו התלושים. שריסוק כזה יפיק את אותה אנרגיה שבוערת, כשהחברה נקרעת לשסעים, פרוכת בית המקדש, וראשו של המלך נערף וניתק מגופה של המדינה, כי המלך המרפא הפך לפצע. וחיבוק המדורה הוא קרינה, מוקד הטבע שמתפרק, חסר ישע כדי לספק לנוכחים עלייה קלה שבקלות בטמפרטורת החדר. שהאופן שבו כל ייצור מניח פריצה, פיצול, פרידה, וההיסטוריה אינה אלא בעירה, וכדור הארץ ערימה רכה של עצים להסקה. מונחת להתייבש בשמש. לא יאמן, נכון? Okay, so we've experienced these 2 poems, and I really feel that every reading here is a way of experiencing it. By the way, I think that even the non-Italian speaking audience here can appreciate and enjoy the way you read your poetry, because, you know, for the non-Italian, Italian as such is a form of poetry within itself in terms of musicality. So I'm sure they can, you know, put you as a, you know, a reader of poetry, and it's a nice piece of music. Anyways, but we see in these two poems, as you said, a shift from this very abstract notion of the mind to the very world itself, to the material processes and a general fascination, I would say, with the raw materials of the world. And I was curious because, again, usually poetry is considered in the popular imagination, at least, as having to do with the interior world, with the world of, as I said earlier, emotions or the heart. And my question is, what is the source of fascination for you as a writer, as a poet, in the nature itself, and what possibilities for other poets does the nature as such, or the material as such, present?
I can add that Mandelstam, maybe my favorite poet, said that Italian language was so strange that seemed to him a Dadaistic language. So this is the idea of Mandelstam. Well, this book, these two poems are published in a book that is of 92, so 12 years after the first one. And in these 12 years, my perspective changed very much. My life too. I had tempest problems and so on. Well, the fact is that I became really interesting in the outside. The first book, in Italy there is a tradition. We say that we have two directions in our poetry: Dante and Petrarca. Dante is the multilingualism, the variation, the dirty material. Petrarca, on the contrary, is the purity. Well, Petrarca wrote in a very little chamber, cameretta. He said, I write in my chamber. And in a way, La Cameretta, the little chamber of Petrarca, is the chamber of my first book. But 12 years after is the chaos that was underground is come out. And so these two poems are very representative, because the first one is the story of a couple, of two lovers. But the temperature is produced by petrol, by gas, the Russian gas that we don't have more. And so I reflect on the double distance, the petrol, the essence, I don't know, which is the exact word. Petrol, it's clear?
Yeah. Fuel, yes.
The petrol came from far away, from Arabian, I don't know, from Venezuela, but as another form of distance, an historical distance. The petrol is a product of the prehistory. So I think to the radiator, and I have the impression that in the radiator, there is the soul of the prehistory, this kind of petrol, of fire that make the radiator work. On the other side, the second poem is strange, because I'm quite surprised in reading it, and in discovering that is in 92 is a poem that speaks about climate, that speaks about our future as human species. In fact, I have to say that I am an enthusiastic follower of Greta Thunberg. I think that I wrote an article in, it's not very original, but it was very, very deep in my mood. I wrote that for me, Greta is like Jeanne d'Arc from French, but Jeanne d'Arc had to save the French, the France. Greta had to say the word. I am really, really very passionating in the reflection about our ecosystem. And I have a name to suggest. It's a very famous name, but for me, it was really someone who changed my thought. Gregory Bateson, this great, I don't know, cybernetic scientist, the book on the ethology by Gregory Bateson for me was absolutely fundamental.
Are you talking about the double bind?
Yeah.
Cybernetics and I never heard anyone talking about this book.
See, but
it's marvelous, but you know, it's not right from the it's like they checked it and the data wasn't right.
Because
but it's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah,
it's inspiration.
And he changed subjects: double bind, nature, thermostatic, computers. Genius.
Primo Levi says that in one of his essays, Primo Levi is saying in one of his essays that writers should be looking at nature and at National Geographic to find all the treasures, the hidden treasures for writing that are there. So these poems certainly reflect it. And now we know that even the most romantic image of a couple sleeping, falling asleep together in the cameretta, they're not alone, but they're there with Venezuela, with the petróleo, and with the sense of the world. So
thank you, really.
That's I think an enriching insight. So
that was my intention.
On my next romantic moment, I will remember that the air conditioner is also part of the room.
Of course.
Brilliant. Okay, so with that, after you know, us having discussed, let's say, the formation from a sort of abstraction into diving, let's say, into the material world, I think the next logical step would be to think of the more human side of materiality in the world. And the next poem will deal with politics and our engagement or our commitment to politics within poetry, but also will allow us to discuss a bit about a shared passion and profession, which is translation. So we will first read out the poem and then speak some more.
Can I say something about the quotation or after?
Sure, better.
Okay, Rossini is a very well-known musician, 1900th century. There is an opera of Rossini, Il Turco in Italia. You see, su un'aria del Turco in Italia, the Turkish in Italy. But is a story similar to Mozart, in which Turkish means something very rich, very aristocratic, and so on, that visit Italy. Hearing the TV, I heard the phrase, the name, Curdo in Italia. Curdo is from Kurdistan. It's like Turkish. It sounds like Turkish, but it's someone very different because Kurdi are very poor, are running from their land and so on. So these are the two verses of Rossini opera. Cara Italia, al fin ti miro, vi saluto, amiche sponde. And that's the poem. Riposa tutta quanta la penisola, avvolta da una trepida collana di affogati. Ognuno di loro è una briciola fatta cadere per ritrovare la strada. Ma i pesci le hanno mangiate e i clandestini, persi nel mare senza più ritorno, vagano come tanti pollicini seminati nell'acqua torno torno.
אריה מטורקי באיטליה. איטליה נעברה, סוף סוף עיני אותך שוזפת. חופים מקרי לבב, אשא לכם ברכת שלום. I hope I did the operatic sound properly. And now the poem. משתרע חצי האי, מוקף ענק נרעד של הטובעים. כל אחד מהם פירור שהושלך כדי למצוא את הדרך. אבל הדגים אכלו אותם, וגונבי הגבול עבדו במצולות לבלי שוב. עמי ותמי שהוטמנו במים, ושתים סחור סחור. So before we again delve into the political sphere in which or from which the song has been written, I want to share both with you and the audience some of, I see here a question, we'll give it a minute perhaps. So I want to talk a little bit about translation and the act of translation, because Valerio and I had a conversation specifically about this poem, which was fairly enigmatic for me in some senses. I want to walk the audience through some of the questions or doubts or dilemmas that went on, because I think it's interesting and very telling for what we do here, especially as both this festival and Valerio specifically celebrate multilinguismo or plural linguism. So perhaps it can be interesting. Can we see for a minute the two languages, the poem itself? Can we put the slideshow?
Yeah.
No, sure. I'm okay. There you go. So I read this poem and I had several issues with it, because the main thing that I struggled with as a translator was these pollicini, because as every translator, I see a word which I'm not certain about, I Google it, and like pretty much any term, any unknown term in Italian, when you Google it, the 2-3 first results are restaurants in this name in Italy. So that was no clue. And from there, I went on until I realized that it refers to a French tale, let's say, that in Hebrew bears a completely different name. It's Be'oni. And then I was asking myself if that's the proper or the right translation. And having consulted with Valerio, it came about that the major reason for its being here is that trope of spreading the breadcrumbs in order to find the way. And I said that for the Hebrew reader, for the Israeli maybe reader, that feature is inherently related to Hansel and Gretel, to Ami Vetami. So we've decided to change the specific cultural reference, or as you say many times in the world of translation, we changed it in order for it to stay the same. So this has led me to think about translation in general, which I do often, obviously, but there is a lot of talk about what you lose in translation, But I would like to ask you, both as a poet and as a translated poet, and a translator, an active translator, what is gained? What could be gained in translation? Or to put in a different way, like, did you had a chance to learn something new, to gain a new perspective into your own poetry from the act of its translation?
Yeah, this is a point that I like so much, because I like to translate. I wrote a book on translation, and in the cover of this book, I put an image of Hercules, the hero, the Greek hero, that have to choose because the street is divided into different directions. I don't know which is the name of Bivio, Scheidewege, the point in which the street become double. Anyway, no, it's not important. The important is that Hercules is in the point of the unique way become double, and he have to choose. And this is important. A lot of critical said that the translation is a decisional process. To translate means to decide. And Hercules, in this way, Hercules is for me the most important figure that represent our work. Well, in this case, the most important is, in my opinion, the bread on the road. This is the meaningful part of the story. So yes, I see very well that the Hansel and Gretel are two brothers, and Pollicino, on the contrary, is alone. But the most important is to be lost and to try to find the way with this little particle of bread. So every time that we translate, we have to make a critical act. The translator is always a critic because he has to decide. I have an example, very beautiful. I spent 10 years on a Baudelaire sonnet. This sonnet is a personal story.
Not
but
right, 10 years.
Image that my daughter, without telling me anything, had a tattoo on the main of the first verse of the sonnet. The sonnet, the title is Recueillement, and the first verse is the incipit. Sois sage, ô ma douleur, be calm, my sorrow. Well, in French, douleur is feminine. So is the poet that preach to a female, to his muse, to his lover, I don't know, to a woman. That's clear. But in Italian, douleur, dolore, it's masculine. So how can you translate be calm, my dolore? It's changed completely the sense of the sonnet. In this case, the grammatical gender is the most important thing. So I translate not dolore, douleur, dolore, but douleur, pena, sofferenza, And I think that in betrayal, the text, I was closer to the text.
And that was the phrase that she tattooed on her body. That was the phrase that was tattooed.
Yes,
in French. In French, okay.
Sois sage, Madulaire. No. Okay. Pure Baudelaire.
Yeah, no, it's always a question in Hebrew. The most notable Hebrew poets, some of them at least, Bialik, Goldberg, has related to the topic, and one of them said that poetry is like not poetry. Sorry, translation is like a woman. If it's faithful, it's not beautiful. If it's beautiful, it's not faithful.
Yeah.
It was said in the 1950s. Another one said that translating poetry is like kissing through a handkerchief. So, and obviously there is the traduttore traditore.
I have a beautiful story, because once in my life, just once, I dinner with Amos Oz. And they told me that Amos Oz is terrible, it's very difficult. But I don't know why, maybe because the food was good. Anyway, it was different. It was very, very friendly. And talking about translation, he told me something very beautiful and very important and very true. He said, I can tell you all the story of my, how do you say uncle the female? Uncle?
Same, yes.
Same.
Uncle is uncle.
Uncle, okay.
Aunt,
yes.
Sorry.
I can explain you all the life of my aunt for 2, 3, 5 days, but you shan't understand the flavor, the image of my real aunt. And this is the difference between the translation and the original text. For me, the example of the aunt is marvelous.
Great. So we have like I did my best to show your aunt your poetic aunt to the audience, and I think that we have some questions. So perhaps I could talk forever about translation and other things, but I think let's pinpoint one more issue before I open the floor to questions, because we do want to end with the final song, a poem. So. Yeah, we'll get there. So the one quick last question of mine was that this poem, regardless of translation issues, is having to do with current events, with the political sphere, or at least with the world of the human comedy, as Balzac says. If we started with Dante, and you are a French expert. So my question is, what poetry has to contribute to sorry, I see more questions here. Anyway, so what can the poetry offer or contribute to the political sphere, comparing to journalism, fiction, even social media? Like poetry in itself, does it have like a specific power or appeal within the political realm, or is it just another way for the artist to express herself?
Is it English indispensable? Okay.
Perfectly.
I think to Jean Cocteau, a writer, theater writer, a poet, very brilliant, maybe too much brilliant, but anyway, a real writer that was invited to Académie Française, and he had to read a speech, and this speech finished with this affirmation: poetry is indispensable, but I don't remember to who and to which. And in a way, I can agree with Cocteau, because I'm sure that poetry is a goal. This is a concept by Josip Brodsky. Brodsky say that the poetry is the most important part of language. The language is the most important part of humanity. So the poetry is our linguistic goal, but also our genetic goal. And I think it's the most impressive definition of poetry, because it's like an Aristotelic syllogism. In fact, I agree, but poetry at the same time is something it's like a Cinderella. We say that in the library, poetry is like Cinderella. It's not important at all. So I know that it's absolutely useless to write a poem, but for me it's very important, that's sure. And I think that anyway, it's a form of humanity. Another story I like very, very much. You know the polemic between Celan and Adorno. Adorno told it's impossible to write poetry after Auschwitz. And Celan was so sorry because he felt himself like responsible continuing writing poetry. The most beautiful answer is from an American poet, Mark Strand. It was a friend of mine. Mark Strand said, if men can write poetry after Auschwitz, he can not even have breakfast. And that's fantastic, because poetry is like breakfast. Till we have a man, we have breakfast and poetry. When the man will despair, all will be finished. It's not so spiritual and high and far. It's something really, really touchable. It's breakfast. I like so much this idea.
Started with poetry as a way to deal with the internal chaos, and now poetry is breakfast. So I think we have the full scale
Yeah.
poetry can do for you, according to Valerio Magrelli.
It's multiple.
Yes, great. Everything is included. Okay, so we have several questions. I think I will bundle them. I will put them together, and you can answer to whatever strikes you as relatable. Okay, so Adi David says, I must read it in Italian, sorry. Ho una domanda a Valerio, qual era la tua ispirazione a scrivere questi poemi? Loro bellissimi, grazie per questa serata che sei qui per noi, grande onore.
Bello, grazie.
I concur, I agree. So that's a first thing. You can start thinking about inspiration. Then you're asked about what meaningful poetry in Italy plays out, or you recommend even, or point out to today, going out from the two strade, the Dante and Petrarca. I mean, after Dante and Petrarca, what else? Who's next? And I think that's it by way of questions. Katarina says, thank you, Mr. Valerio. This is so beautiful and enriching, and enjoy listening to you. So that's what we have from the audience, unless I'm missing something. And if I do, please help out. Yes. Okay. So we now have the answers, and then we will end with the last poem. So if you have more questions, that's the time.
Well, I can say that I had no fathers in Italy in Italian literature, rather grandfathers, and so some names of poets that have been translated, of course, in Hebrew. Giorgio Caproni, for instance, and they are very different between them. Giorgio Caproni, Andrea Zanzotto, Vittorio Sereni, Bertolucci. You know, maybe the son of Bertolucci, come si dice, the filmmaker.
Director, yes.
And the filmmaker was poet too, but the father was a great poet. So these are our most important grandfather. And then the classic, because for me, literature is a continuum. So I have to I quoted Mandelstam, Ponge, Michaud. For me, Michaud was a fantastic poet. Also is well known as writer, yes, but he's a big poet. And for instance, I was absolutely surprised and shocked in reading John Donne, 17th century, the metaphysic English poet. So there is no order. I think that is very beautiful for a student to lost himself in a library and discover poetry, and sometimes discover that famous poets are not so great, are not so important for him. Why not? I can say you that I have a problem with the most important Italian writer, Manzoni. Have you heard the name of Manzoni? Well, for me, Manzoni is one of the most important writer, novelist. His novel is a masterpiece, but his poems are rubbish. Si dice rubbish? Sì, disgusting. And this is my opinion, of course, but I like that we speak about literature with the same passion that we speak about football.
About breakfast.
Yeah.
Great. So I hope you all took notes, all the students here, because there's a lot of things to take in. So before we all go to our non-poetic lives and to our families, I want us to stay with Valerio's take on his own family. And before we release you back to your own family, I think it would be interesting to see what can be thought of as an culmination of all the things that we've discussed, you know, from the poetic to the emotional, to the abstract, and always to the material side of things. So I think we can read our last poem of the day.
Thank you. I just say that all the poem is a description of the very last verse. So in the last verse, in the tale, there is the solution. La famiglia del poeta. Ci amiamo tanto, ma ogni cozzo è un lampo. Qui dentro, stretti stretti, vicini ogni momento, in un sacchetto annodato dalla sorte. Si sente forte come per gli urti ticchettiamo. Da noi non fa mai notte, c'è sempre uno sprazzo che scocca, illuminandoci appena ci tocchiamo. Noi ci vogliamo bene, ma di un bene che abbaglia e certe volte scotta. Noi siamo la famiglia delle pietre focaie.
משפחת המשורר. אנחנו מאוד אוהבים, אבל ברק ניצת כשאנחנו מתגוששים. פה בפנים, צפופים צפופים, קרובים כל רגע, בשק שקשרה יד הגורל. ושומעים טוב מאוד איך אנחנו מתנגשים. אצלנו לא יורד לילה, תמיד מתנוצץ אצלנו גץ, למגע איש באחיו. אנחנו רוצים את הטוב ביותר, אבל זהו טוב מסנבר, לפעמים צורב. אנחנו משפחת אבני הצור. אז תודה רבה לוולריו. Thank you very much, Valerio. In the unlikely case that it's not clear, אבני הצור are the stones that produce fire when they're hit, one against the other.
Flintstone.
I'm not a chemist, so okay. I think that's it. So again, in my name or behalf, thank you very much for very pleasant days and weeks with your poems, with the kind help of Noah and all the team. And I pass the mic back to Noah.
So thank you. I wish to thank you, Valerio Magrelli and Jonathan Fine, for this wonderful conversation. You made my day. And to the audience, please come back here in about 25 minutes for a French poetry celebration with Natalie Quintan, Linda Maria Barros, Rotem Attar, and Yoel Taib. And see you soon. Thank you.
Grazie. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.